This episode is sponsored by Ellie.
Ellie is one of the world's leading online content providers for English teachers.
If you're looking for relevant, ready-made materials to get your students talking, head over to ellie.com today.
That's ELLII.com.
Hello and welcome to the Teacher Think-Aloud Podcast, a podcast for reflective practice for teachers of English around the world. I'm Anna, and I'm joined, as always, by Shé.
I'm here. Hello.
Hello, Shé.
Hi.
And today, we're talking about something that I personally find deeply, genuinely exciting, and something that Shé is, I think, based on prior conversations, I think Shay's still learning to love.
Grammar.
Yes.
We are talking about
panic.
grammar. Listeners, don't panic. I'm not panicking. But I will admit, this conversation did reignite a flame of interest in grammar for me, if I can say that. That's a big statement.
Yeah.
Our guest, Audrea Gold, brought such an enthusiasm to the conversation that I'm rethinking my resistance after all these years.
And that's saying something. But it makes sense because what Audrea brought to the table is the NUFU framework. And you know we can't resist a good framework. NUFU, which stands for Noticing, Understanding, Forming, and Using, is an inductive, student-centered approach to grammar instruction.
Yes. We are not talking about that drill and kill for grammar instruction, but something that's more intuitive, more organic as a way of approaching grammar.
So let's meet our fellow language nerd, Audrea.
My name is Audrea Gold. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm an ESL teacher of 6 years now, as well as the founder of the ESL Grammar Gallery. And outside of the world of ESL, I'm a huge language enthusiast. I love studying foreign languages. I studied several in college, and I love to explore different ways and methods to make studying languages easier and more intuitive.
Well, now I want to know what languages you've studied, just like a little bit less
I'm
nutshell-y.
happy to divulge. No, that's fine. So I have studied French, I've studied Spanish, Portuguese. In college, I studied Chinese, Japanese, and Korean. And then I've also studied a bit of Haitian Creole. My parents are from Haiti, so I'm trying my best to learn through them.
Oh, that's amazing. Oh, I love that. Like heritage language preservation plus a little sprinkling of everything, it seems.
Yes. I try to stay well-rounded.
Definitely.
Well,
Awesome.
you're in good company. Anna and I both love studying languages.
Fellow language nerds.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm working a little
Totally.
bit on Chinese and Japanese now myself, and oh man,
Amazing.
so fun. Just so fun.
It is so fun.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. It is. Best of luck with your studies.
Thank you. Yeah, I need it. Definitely. All right, sorry. Here we go.
Yeah.
Let's get back to it.
Before we dive into our topic for the day, let's take a second for our icebreaker question. I would love for you to tell me what a small daily ritual or habit is that helps you stay grounded as a teacher or content creator.
Ooh, that is a good question. Well, I think the first thing that comes to my mind is I very much believe in the concept of pouring into yourself before you pour into others. And as a teacher, that's especially important because we pour into others all day. Teachers give of themselves tirelessly. So something that's really important to me is my morning routine. I am very strict about it. I love to wake up, spend some time for myself. I normally drink tea, maybe kombucha if I'm feeling a little fancy, and I love to read. I love professional development books. I love self-help, and just overall just taking that time for myself in the morning before I am, pouring into other people. I find that to be really important and very grounding.
Yeah, mornings are so sacred. Yeah.
They are. 100% agree with that.
Yeah, if you start off on the wrong foot, the rest of your day is just out the window, Yeah.
All right. Well, so let's dive into the content then. So today we're talking about a framework. For listeners who may not be familiar with the framework, tell us a little bit about the NUFU framework, high level, and tell us how it shifts how grammar is typically taught.
Absolutely. So, this framework is something that I had no idea existed prior to my master's program.
Hmm.
So, if anyone is like, I have no clue what this is, like, you are not alone at all.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, it's a methodology for teaching grammar in a more inductive manner than what many of us were taught, which is, here are the rules, memorize them, do these exercises, and pray that it sticks. And I'm sure, for anyone who studied another language, this might be familiar to you. Like maybe this is invoking memories of falling asleep in French or Spanish class as your teacher was lecturing to you about grammar rules that you may or may not have understood. So the NUFU framework, and I always laugh when I say that, but the framework basically throws that out of the window and says, like, how can we teach grammar differently so that it's not so dry or painful? And also, how can we put less of the onus on teachers and more on the student so that they, A, take more responsibility for their learning, and B, are more engaged as a result? And so the framework proposes that teaching grammar should follow 4 stages. The first one, N, is noticing, which is where students are invited to examine the grammar for themselves in a real life context, and they kind of suss out the rules based on their own observations. So that's the first one. The second one, U, is for understanding, which is where the teacher guides students to dive deeper into the grammar's meaning and function and use as well. And this part looks more similar to what you might think of when you envision a traditional grammar lesson, but it still maintains that inductive approach of, let's discover these rules together instead of the expectation that the teacher just lecture at the students. The third part, F, stands for forming. And this is when students start to practice forming the grammar on their own through various exercises. And the last part is another U, but this one stands for using. And it's where students are able to use the grammar on their own to accomplish communicative-based tasks, first with more controlled exercises, of course, and then eventually to more free practice. So that's it in a nutshell.
That's a fantastic overview, like really clear and concise. And, I kind of
really
remember.
Did my best.
Yeah,
Prepared guest. Oh my, thank you so much. That's wonderful. Yeah.
I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah, and I think, a lot of teachers probably are like doing this a little bit, but don't necessarily have a framework for it.
Okay, so I just want to take a breath here for a second because I think most of us who learned a language in school can hear that overview and immediately just have a visceral reaction like, oh, what did I miss? Like, I don't think my teachers were using the NUFU framework. Were yours?
No, for me it was, here's the rule, here are 20 sentences, fill in the blank, get graded. And I thought that was just what grammar was. I didn't know there was another way until grad school when I learned to teach grammar myself.
I think the thing that strikes me the most about what Audrea just described is that the student is actually doing the intellectual work from the very first minute. They're not just receiving information, right? They're generating observations about language. And that is such a different cognitive posture.
Yeah, definitely. It's the difference between say being handed a map, like here you go, memorize these capital cities versus being asked to draw a map with the capital cities. Which of these activities is going to stick with you longer?
Exactly.
I'd love to hear a little bit more now about each of these stages now that you've given us an overview. So do you mind taking us through noticing, why is this stage so critical?
Yeah.
What are some ways to actually do that in the classroom, right? How do we get our students to notice grammar in meaningful contexts, right? Rather than just going straight to the rules, which is what you were saying is kind of what we used to do. Yeah.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. So noticing this stage is critical because it sets the tone for a good lesson. And honestly, I think it's kind of twofold. I think students, A, they have to notice a situation in which the grammar is necessary, and then B, also notice the rules about the grammar itself. So the first part, again, students need to know why this grammar is important. That matters because if they don't know how they're going to use it, they are not going to care. So as an example, In my experience as an ESL teacher, I've taught mostly adult immigrants and I love them very deeply. And for some reason, the majority, like 85% of my students have been women between the ages of 30 and 60. And I love teaching adults, like I said, but sometimes I found it's harder to get them engaged than younger students, just, due to different energy levels. And with women, a lot of them have kids, they have families. So by the time they come into my class, and I teach evenings, by the way, they are already exhausted. So anyways, there's one class I had to teach on adjective order. So like, why we say the beautiful blue cotton dress instead of the cotton beautiful blue dress. And so I could have gone into that room and started the lesson like, hello, everyone. Today we're going to talk about adjective order. Adjective order is a phenomenon in English and I could have watched the light slowly fade from their eyes as everyone falls asleep. So exactly. So instead, I kind of had to adjust my introduction slightly so that they would notice for themselves what context the grammar could be used in and see how it was relevant to their lives. So something fun that I did was, are you guys familiar with the movie The Devil Wears Prada?
I mean, yeah.
Love it.
I don't know that I've ever seen it, if I'm being honest.
What?
So you might have to
goodness.
elaborate this. Yes, I'm one of those people who haven't seen like very basic movies, and
That's okay.
Oh,
I'll
we can
walk you
remedy
through
this.
it.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. So describe in great detail this scene for me, please. I'll
Of
imagine
course.
it.
So basically, it's about, it stars Anne Hathaway, and she plays a character who works at a fashion magazine. And at first, she has trouble fitting in, but then eventually, she learns how to like navigate the world of fashion. But there's a scene in the middle of the movie where she's finally learned how to like dress appropriately for the workplace, and then
Quote,
there's
unquote.
right, quote unquote, and there's like a montage of her like wearing all these gorgeous outfits, and then the song Vogue by Madonna is playing in the background. My favorite part. But anyways, I played that 60-second video montage in class, and then I asked my students, I was like, guys, what did you notice from the video? What do you think our topic is today? And they were like, teacher, are we talking about fashion? And I was like, yeah. And everyone was like, oh my gosh, yay! And, already everyone was excited and, they were engaged and they were that much more ready to dive into the lesson because they noticed for themselves, like, okay, this is something relevant to me. It's something that I enjoy. So because of that, they were more receptive to the grammar instruction that followed. So I think that's the first part. Now, when it comes to noticing the grammar itself, I like to do this in a few ways. I think one way is through short text or dialogues that show the grammar in context and having them read aloud and answer questions about the grammar. Like, guys, like, what did you notice about this verb? Is it the base form? Is it past tense? Is there an ing? What did you notice about the structure? And basically just continuing to ask them what they observe. Another good way is through photos, which for a lesson on something like adjective order would probably make more sense. So something I did for that lesson in particular was I showed pictures of different outfits and I would ask like, what color is this dress? Is it a long or short dress? Do you think it's made of silk or cotton? And as they tell me what they observe, I write it down on the board. Okay, so this is a short black silk dress. Then we move on to another picture and repeat the exercise. And then inevitably, a student asks, teacher, can't I say this is a silk black short dress? And I could say, oh, no, that's not really how it works. And then we can use that to transition into the understanding phase. But like I said, a good lesson starts with a good noticing phase where, again, they notice the topic in a real life context that's relevant to their interests. And then they also notice the rules on their own, whether, again, that's through dialogues, photos, or other activities.
I first of all, yes, you're connecting with their interests right there. They're like, yes, I want to talk about fashion. And then, I think that point of, you need to connect to what it is, like how it's useful to them. Adult learners, we know they just want to know how it's relevant. And you said the word relevant multiple times. So I think that's just a brilliant way to connect. And the fact that you're just getting them to inductively get all of the language out and then figure out the sequencing and noticing all of that. I just really love that example. I'm totally going to use it if I ever have a chance. Yeah.
I hope you
Stealing
do.
it. Yeah.
Feel free.
Yeah. I think often when teachers are taught to work with students on noticing, they're told to direct students to a chunk of language or language on a written page, or listen to this audio and see what you notice about this particular sentence. And the students start to think like, what the heck am I supposed to be noticing about, this chunk of language? So I think without having that sort of explicit directive to pay attention to specific pieces of language, aspects of language, the students can feel sort of disoriented, right? And I think that, when we're having them look at it on the page, that's super boring, right? It doesn't matter how engaging we think the material is. It's still on the page. So I love that you found a way to really pull out authentic language use. So that's the first piece. The second piece, and I remembered that there were two things.
Yay.
I love that you're having students produce that language, and you're curious about how they're organically forming these utterances. And then from there, you have this baseline to work with. So kudos to you. I love that.
Thank you. That means a lot.
I just want to sit with that for a second, because what Audrea just described is elegant, but I think it might look easy on paper in a way that doesn't capture how much thought she really put into it, right?
Yeah.
She didn't just pick any random fun video. She thought, who are my students? What do they care about? And what hook is going to make this grammar feel necessary? And I think that's the real skill, right? It's not about finding the cleverest activity. It's about knowing your learners well enough to know what's going to land.
Absolutely. So for teachers listening, and I'm especially thinking of people who work with adults like Audrea does, that question at the heart of the noticing stage is really, when would my students actually need this grammar in their lives? Not in a test, not in a textbook exercise, in their lives. And if you can answer that, well, then you've got your hook, right?
I love that as a reframe. What real world door does this grammar open? Another benefit is that by spending time noticing and deducing rules from the language itself, our students get better over time at picking up on patterns in language, right? They become better language learners through this process. So the next time they need to deduce a rule, they'll be able to do it more quickly, maybe, or they could carry over that skill to learning other languages.
Yeah, it really just amplifies their language learning aptitude, right?
Yes, exactly. That's the right word. But I digress, of course. So we could talk about this all day. So we've covered noticing. Now what?
So let's move into the next part, the understanding phase. A lot of times teachers are struggling to balance clarity with over-explaining. You mentioned that you work with adult learners. I've spent a lot of my career working with adult learners in a very similar context to what you've described. A 7 to 9 p.m. program for non-traditional adult learners in an IEP. They're exhausted. They're balancing, so many different priorities. So we don't want to overburden them with our explanations. We have to keep it tight. So let's talk about some of the ways that teachers can approach giving explanations in this phase that are both concrete and useful.
Sure thing. And this is a great question, again, especially for adult learners. My advice would be to first focus on 3 things when explaining grammar. It should be meaning, usage, and form. For me, at the end of the day, if students take nothing else from the lesson, I would hope that they at least understand those 3 things. So form is the structure of the grammar, spelling, etc. It's answering the question, how do I, assemble this grammatical structure together? So let's say we're doing a lesson on present perfect, for example. The form would be, I have my pronoun, I have the conjugated form of the verb to have, and then I have my past participle. So that is the form. And that's step 1. Step 2 is meaning, which is, again, what does this grammar mean? So if we're doing, to continue with the present perfect example, this would be the time to talk about how we use it for actions that happened at unspecified times in the past or unfinished actions, etc. And then as for use, it's answering the question, when and how is this grammar used and in what context? I mean, I feel like I've shot myself in the foot a little bit here because present perfect is used for 1,000 things in English, but I think one of the most common ways it's used is for talking about experiences. So, like, I've been to Paris twice where I've seen the Empire State Building. So, I find that focusing on these three things is a great place to start for explaining any grammar point. And then I would also recommend going over exceptions to grammar rules, but trying to limit yourself if possible. We all know every single English grammar point has exceptions, which is incredibly frustrating because it's usually just as a student thinks, okay, like I've mastered this grammar point, an exception will come zooming out of left field and trip them up. So, so like with modal verbs, it's important to tell them from the get-go, like, guys, there is no final S on verbs like can or should if your pronoun is he, she, it. So I recommend spending time going over exceptions like that after like the main explanation of form, meaning, and use, and before they start any practice exercises, just so they have an idea of what to expect beforehand. And I also encourage people, tell your students, like, the rules I teach you will be applicable 95% of the time, but there are always exceptions. So just brace yourself for those because, that's any language, but I feel like in English, it happens frequently enough to sort of justify a disclaimer like this. So anyways, that's what I would recommend.
Well, I think, when we're in this phase, I think the action verbs are tell students, do this, show them, explain. So let's talk a little bit about how we might lower the teacher talk time, even in this sort of explanation phase.
Oh, that's a good question. I like to have students work together a lot of the time. And I feel like that goes a long way into taking some of the burden off me as a teacher. And again, putting that responsibility onto them for their own learning. I want them to see me as a resource that can help them, but I'm not this fount of all knowledge. Like, they are more than capable of deducing rules for themselves and walking it together. And if not, they have their peers to help them as well. So I try to make sure the classroom is structured in a way where they know, like, I'm here to learn, I'm responsible for my own learning. I can certainly ask the teacher if I have questions, but it's expected that I put in the work as well.
Yeah. And I think, sometimes it can take a little longer to get there, right? Which can feel frustrating for a teacher, but like then there's some ownership over what they've just discovered about this small little piece of grammar, this piece of language, that by deducing, the word you used was deducing, through deduction, they're able to kind of say like, wow, we figured it out. Like now it kind of sinks in a little bit more. It's easier to remember. The more like actual cognitive resources you use on something, the better you remember it, right? And the better you can apply it. So I think that really helps lead up then to, what comes next, right? Forming.
Yes, absolutely.
So can you tell us now, let's talk about forming. What kinds of sentence level or instruction focused activities have you found most effective within this framework for helping students kind of get to the point where they can actually form this structure?
Yes, sure. So for me, this is the most fun part, and it's something I spent a lot of time implementing into the ESL Grammar Gallery. I found that there's a specific sequence of exercises that really help students form the grammar accurately. So again, the forming stage is where, students have been engaged, they've noticed the grammar in context, they've sussed out the rules. Now they are given the task of forming the grammar on their own. And the specific sequence I mentioned that I think works best for this phase is something I like to call reverse hand-holding, where it's kind of similar to helping a child learn how to ride a bike. So how first, you're there, you're monitoring them, you're holding them tightly, and then you gradually release your grip little by little until they're able to ride on their own. So the idea is you do the same thing, but with grammar. So in my experience, the best exercise to do first for the forming stage isn't really a forming exercise. It's an unscramble exercise where their only focus is on adjusting a set of scrambled sentences into the form that they just learned. So as an example, let's say we're doing a lesson on present continuous. So she is sleeping, I'm studying. At the top of the board, I'll put the proper form of the grammar up. So I'll put subject, to be, verb with ing, object if applicable. And then I'll give them a bunch of scrambled sentences that they have to put in order according to the example on the board. So I might write something like, coffee is drinking she. And then they'll have to work together to put that in order. She is drinking coffee. Or like they, homework, doing are. And then they would have to unscramble it and say they are doing homework. The really important thing is, and I'm speaking to my past self, by the way, but to make sure to not just practice affirmative sentence patterns, I recommend, like, you really have to also go over negative structures, interrogative structures, and responses, which is something I would frequently forget to do when I first started teaching. Like, we would spend all of this time on affirmative sentences, and then I'd put them in pairs to do a speaking exercise, and then I hear them going, you are writing a paper? She is drinking coffee? I'm like, no, it's, are you writing a paper? They get frustrated at me. They're like, teacher, what do you mean? So it's really important to repeat this exercise for all sentence structures, like affirmative, negative, questions, and responses. And so once they've gotten the hang of unscrambling sentences into the right form, then I like to do another exercise that I call framework fills. So for these, I'll show students a picture, and underneath the picture, I'll put a line. And underneath the line, I'll put in little brackets that correspond to the structure of that grammar. So to continue with the present continuous example, there'd be a bracket for subject, there's a bracket for to be, there's a bracket for verb with ing, and then one for object. And then I might show a picture of a girl reading a book. And I'll ask the class, what is she doing? Then I'll point to the bracket that's a subject, and I go, is it I, is it you, or is it she? And then prompt them to go, she. Okay, so we write that in together. Then I point to the next bracket to be, and I'm like, she am? She are? And they're like, no, teacher, she is. Okay, so I write that in. Then we go to the part that says verb. What is she doing? Is she sleeping? Is she talking? They go, she's reading. Write that in. Point to object. Reading a what? And they go, oh, reading a book. And then we have our full sentence down. So at this stage, they've gone from unscrambling the incorrect form into literally creating sentences based on the picture and the framework so that they know, okay, first I need my subject, then I need to be, then I need, etc., so that they're familiar with what it takes to form that particular grammar. And then the last exercise I like to do in this sequence is taking the framework away entirely. So in the exercise I just explained, we had the picture and then we had the brackets with the sentence structure parts. And this time, we still show the pictures, but we take the framework away. And I love this exercise because to me, this is what most closely mimics the real world. At this stage, there's no more hand-holding, no more guardrails. Like by now they should know, okay, like my subject is first, then to be, etc. So then they have that knowledge, or they have to use that knowledge to create the sentences on their own. And to be fair, it is a bit tricky at first. And whenever I do this in the classroom, my students are always like, teacher, where did the structure go? Like, bring it back. I'm like, it's in your head now. Like, you just have to use it. And, you know, it'll take them a second, but after more practice, I know that, okay, they're able to produce the grammar accurately on their own. They're able to form it, and they can use it to describe, you know, what they see around them, which is exactly the skill that they'll need to use the grammar in real life.
Yeah, I love that's a really great way of approaching, you know, this kind of syntax, especially like developing that structural experience. And, you know, I love your example because you walked us through all these different phases of scaffolding, right? You're just slowly, you know, taking the guardrails away as you're saying.
Exactly.
And you said something like right before you launched into it, which was, I'm speaking to my past self. I think we've all been there where we like, you know, when we first start teaching, we're like, I taught the thing and now go have a conversation. The students are like, what?
It doesn't work that way.
I need more practice.
What were the instructions?
Yes. Yeah. So I think that's a really nice like example of that. Yeah.
My favorite is when I've spent all this time explaining, you know, a grammar point or what have you. And I go, does everyone understand? They go, yes, teacher. Okay, is everyone ready? Yes, teacher. And then they turn to each other. They're like, what did she say? Like, what's going on? I'm like, am I talking to a wall? Like, what just happened? Oh, yeah.
They can be so eager to please their teacher, right?
Yes.
So it comes down to creating this environment where they feel comfortable to be able to say, no, teacher, I didn't understand.
Right. Oh my
right?
gosh, just tell me. Like, my feelings won't get hurt. It's okay.
This is my job, right? I'm here because I care. I really want you to learn this. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Well, yeah, I can only echo Anna's sentiments. I thought this was really fantastically scaffolded. And I love, of course, the image of a child learning how to ride a bike and removing the training wheels. And, you know, when you said that they're like, where's the structure? I thought, where are the training wheels? Like, I can't do this without my training wheels. So it's a great metaphor. So let's talk a little bit about the using phase. You know, we mentioned the idea of communicative competence, communicative practice. So let's talk about what that actually looks like in your classroom, and how can teachers start to design activities that actually reflect real world language, authentic language use, rather than, you know, having students focus on some artificial output, which I think we've all seen in our foreign language study books. You know, no one would ever say like, my cat ate the bear. It's like, why is this a thing? Duolingo, I'm talking to you.
Duolingo, but yes.
They'll never sponsor us, Anna, I'm sorry.
No.
So yes, I'm happy to talk about the using phase, or usage phase. So in my opinion, this is one of the most critical phases, because this is when students are combining everything they've learned to practice using the grammar in real life situations. So to me, successful communicative practice is, like what you guys said, activities that reflect real world language and situations. So there's a couple of activities that I like to do. The first is conversation questions. And I feel like we've all done this in our classrooms. And, you know, you can do them in pairs or in small groups. So let's say you taught a lesson on the past tense. I might put up a few questions on the board like, what did you do yesterday? What time did you wake up? Where did you go? And I'll have students discuss these together. Now, is this a real world activity? I would say yes, because when you ask students why they are learning a language, typically they'll tell you, like, I want to talk with other people. I want to be able to communicate. So conversation questions like these, they're simple, but they do help students prepare for communicating in the real world. So that's one activity. Another type of activity that I think is great for this phase is task-based activities. So creating these requires, you know, a teacher to think about, what is a real world scenario where my students would have to use this grammar? And then how can I bring that into the classroom? So for example, let's go back to the example of adjective order. So like I mentioned previously, that goes great with a lesson on clothing and fashion. So maybe I'd have my students work in pairs to write dialogues where they pretend they're at a clothing store and looking for specific items. For another example, let's say you're doing like past continuous. I think mimicking police reports can be fun. Like, what were you doing last night at 8:00 p.m., Mrs. Jones? I was brushing my teeth and getting ready for bed. So the nice thing about task-based activities is that you can really have a lot of fun with them. And students normally appreciate being able to practice real-world scenarios in class. So that's another idea. And one last idea that I like, or one last activity that I like to do during this phase is writing prompts, which I have to say, writing isn't always what first comes to mind when you think of communicative activities, because typically I think we think of speaking first. But, you know, at the end of the day, writing is a communicative skill, and it's important that students are given the opportunity to improve it as well. So writing prompts are a great way to do this. I'll ask students to write, I don't know, like 10 sentences using the grammar we just learned to answer a prompt. So going back to the past tense example, it could be something like, where was your last vacation? Where did you travel to? What did you see? What activities did you do? What foods did you eat? And then while they're writing their responses, it's a good time to walk around and offer individual writing corrections as needed. And then once everyone is finished, I like to have them do presentations where they either share what they wrote to each other or in front of the class. Now, in full transparency, most of my students hate presenting. A
Who
lot of
doesn't?
them are very, yeah, you understand. Like a lot of them are just very shy. And so the idea of standing up in front of the class is a scary concept to them. So sometimes they try to get out of it by going, oh, teacher, like I will not present today. And I'm like, that's okay. Like you can just present tomorrow or you can present next week, but you are going to present, my friend.
Teacher,
and,
my throat hurts. Suddenly.
Right, exactly.
Without explanation.
And they'll come up with more excuses and, they'll shake their fists and curse my name. But the reason I still encourage them to do it is because if you can't comfortably speak to your peers in the classroom, it's going to be that much harder to talk in real life. The classroom is the safe place to attempt new things. It's a more forgiving environment than the real world. So it's important to use your time in class well. So that's why, again, the usage phase is so important because it gives them that opportunity to practice in a safe environment so that they have not just the skills, but also the confidence that they need to use those skills in the real world.
You do need to have presentation skills in so many different scenarios that are real world scenarios, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it might not look the same way, but it is some form of presentation, presenting in a meeting, whatever it is that you're doing. I love that you're really thinking about these task-based scenarios because, that's where I think we tie back to that idea that adults in particular really need to see the application. Why do I need this of what they're doing? And so having those kinds of task-based scenarios for them to practice the language in is really important. And while you were talking, I was reminded of of the episode we did last fall or whenever it was on the lexical approach and how, when you're teaching language chunks, you just start noticing them everywhere in the wild. And that gives you lots of materials to bring back to your classroom. And I imagine it's the same with grammar. You start thinking, well, what are some real scenarios where this form is used?
Yeah.
And then you can't stop noticing this you start noticing it in the wild and you're like, oh, I have all these great tasks and real world tasks that I can bring into the classroom.
Absolutely.
Police reports. I like that one.
Yeah.
Feel free to use it. We've definitely used it in my classroom and it's always a fun time.
Yeah.
Well, something that stuck with me was this idea of how do we get shy students, nervous students to overcome their anxiety in using language when you prompt them to in the classroom. And I've been teaching in China in an academic program at a university. I've been teaching research writing. And so a big part of communicating your ideas is being able to do it both, orally and in written form. And so, when I'd have students share their thesis statement for their argument essay, they would say, I'll only share with my friend who I know. I don't want to share with I don't want to make any new friends here. I feel too anxious to talk to anyone new. And so I started, instead of, having them stand up in front of a large group, I would say, well, first of all, chill out. You can just sit down. We don't have to be so formal. And, they were like, stand up for you, teacher, right? Sit down. But then within small groups, instead, practice using this language. So they could choose a buddy or two to work with. So I think that there are ways that we can, sort of lower those affective filters, right?
Yes,
and get them have that sort of that built-in scaffolding. It doesn't have to be this huge performance using your new grammatical structure. You can do it in, a sort of controlled and more comfy environment. So
yes, absolutely. And I think that's another reason why I really like this framework, because there's so much focus on communication. I mean, we learn languages to communicate.
Yeah.
But, I don't know if this is a US thing, but I feel like it's so common to meet people who've studied languages and they'll say, yeah, I studied Spanish for 5 years, but I can't really speak it. And to me, that's such a shame. And I feel like the reason that happens is because it's possible to attend class for 5 years and sort of have that passive experience of being physically in the classroom, but without really being pushed to engage with the material and put what you've learned into practice. So again, that's why I really like this method, because you are given opportunities to practice it and to build that confidence so that you can use it outside of the classroom as well.
Yeah, I think that's pervasive everywhere. Is
we're epidemic. Yes,
we're still working on breaking out of that, but I think this is a great framework to introduce for those who really want to start breaking out of that as teachers in their classrooms. So
absolutely.
I'm feeling really invigorated right now from this conversation. And I'm like, and this, Anna can
She's
tell
jazzed
you,
about
Audrea,
grammar?
it doesn't happen usually talking about grammar. But I think that it goes to show you that like when you have an engaged teacher, an excited, enthusiastic teacher delivering whatever the content may be, learners can have an easier time getting on board, right? So,
absolutely.
But I'm so tempted like to run over to my bookshelf and be like, what was your favorite grammar textbook? I'm like, I haven't thought about these things in a long time. I work primarily with teachers now, so I'm not using grammar textbooks, but I'm really excited about this. Thank you.
Glad I
such a
can help.
nerd. I'm such a nerd. Oh,
No,
man.
you're in good
My
company,
nerd
trust
is
me.
showing.
I mean, listen, that's why we have this podcast is to nerd out.
Right.
But I also wanted to give you a little bit more time to plug Grammar Gallery. I mean, it sounds like such a great resource. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, happy to. It actually came out of my master's program. It was a very unexpected thing. But I guess the official description of the ESL Grammar Gallery is it's an online library of ready-made grammar presentations for ESL teachers. But the unofficial description I like to use is it's the resource I wish I'd had when I first started teaching, because it would have saved me many, many sleepless nights on lesson prep. The basic idea is that if you have to teach a lesson on, I don't know, present perfect, past continuous, modal verbs, you name it, instead of spending your entire evening planning out your explanation and, stressing about what you're going to say, you can kind of just log into the gallery the day of your lesson. You can find the presentation for the grammar topic that you're teaching, and you can walk your students through the slides, which explain the grammar and provide exercises like the ones that we talked about. And as I mentioned, I created it as part of my Master's in TESOL program just about a year ago. And it's made a big difference with my lesson planning process and my stress levels, as well as that of many other ESL teachers.
I love this. This is more speaking to your past self, but like with a physical thing that you can give yourself and give other teachers. So awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks for
I
sharing.
wish that I had access. I'm looking at your website right now. I wish that I had access to a tool like this.
Yes.
I love the design of your content is really aesthetically pleasing. And I can only imagine that the
helps.
content, based on all of your examples here, I'm sure the content is incredible. So
Thank you. That means a lot.
we'll direct our listeners to ESL Grammar Gallery. And I see that they can get 30 free lessons right now. That's pretty cool.
Awesome.
We like
Absolutely
freebies.
can. Right.
Yeah.
All teachers do.
Yes.
Yeah.
I am also a teacher. I'm not immune.
Yeah. Little
Awesome.
resource kleptos. Anyway. Anyway, that got weird.
If you want to explore Audrea's work, check out the ESL Grammar Gallery. It's an online library of ready-made grammar presentations designed specifically for ESL teachers.
And if today's episode sparked something for you, if you've been using some version of NUFU without even knowing it had a name, or if you're already plotting how you're going to overhaul your next grammar lesson, we would love to hear about it.
Yes, write to us on social media or by emailing us directly at teacherthinkaloud@gmail.com. As always, friends, we welcome your questions, reflections, and ideas.
Thank you so much for listening to the Teacher Think Aloud podcast. Until next time, happy teaching.
And happy reflecting. Bye.